Deception is an art form, a weapon more subtle and often more devastating than any cannon. It is wielded not with steel, but with whispers, with shadows, with the careful seeding of an idea into the mind of an enemy. It does not destroy armies with explosives, it paralyzes them with doubt. It poisons the well of certainty and transforms an opponent's greatest strength, their confidence, into their most fatal flaw. But what happens when the masterpiece of deception is finally revealed? How do the most brilliant, most disciplined military minds on Earth react in the exact moment they realize their entire strategy, the very foundation of their defense, is built upon a catastrophic lie? This is the story of that moment, the story of the creeping, dawning, and ultimately soul-crushing realization within the German High Command on the 6th of June, 1944. We will not just tell you what happened, we will take you inside the room, into the frantic phone calls, and into the minds of the men who were about to lose not just the battle, but the entire war. They were outmaneuvered by the greatest, most complex deception in the history of warfare, a ghost story so powerful it held the fate of the world in its ethereal grasp. The early morning hours of June 6, 1944. At the Château de la Roche-Guyon, the headquarters of Army Group B, the air was thick with a tense calm. For weeks they had been waiting. The invasion was coming, that much was certain. The only question was where. As the first reports of airborne landings in Normandy began to trickle in, there was no panic. On the contrary, there was a sense of vindication. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, tasked with defending this coastline, was so confident in his assessment that he was hundreds of miles away in Germany celebrating his wife's birthday. His confidence stemmed from two things: the formidable defenses he had built along the coast and a certainty, shared by the entire German High Command, that the main blow could only fall at one location, the Pas-de-Calais. His Chief of Staff, General Hans Speidel, fielded the initial reports. Allied paratroopers scattered by high winds, landing in the Cotentin Peninsula and near Caen. It was almost clumsy. This was precisely the kind of diversionary attack they had been expecting. General Max Pemsel, commander of the German 7th Army in Normandy, reported the landings but characterized them as a secondary operation. The consensus in those early hours from the bunkers on the coast to the highest echelons of command was clear and unwavering. This was a feint, a clever but predictable attempt to draw their panzer division south, away from the real target. After all, standing guard at the Pas-de-Calais, the shortest sea crossing from England, was the pride of the German army in France, the mighty 15th Army, with 19 divisions of seasoned infantry and powerful panzer formations, waiting for the real invasion they knew was coming. The Allies, however, faced a monumental and terrifying problem. To succeed, their invasion of Normandy, codenamed Operation Neptune, needed to achieve overwhelming numerical superiority on the beaches, and fast. But Germany had two powerful armies defending the French coast: the 7th Army in Normandy and Brittany, and the far more powerful 15th Army in the Pas-de-Calais. Simple arithmetic dictated the outcome. If the 19 divisions of the 15th Army were to race to Normandy in the opening hours of the invasion, the Allied forces would be outnumbered, outgunned, and very likely annihilated on the beaches, turning the liberation of Europe into its bloodiest failure. The solution was not a feat of engineering or firepower, but of imagination. It was a ghost story, a phantom army born from the brilliant minds of Allied deception planners in a department known as the London Controlling Section. It was called Operation Fortitude. The plan was audacious in its scope and breathtaking in its detail. To convince the Germans that the main Allied invasion force, a fictional behemoth called the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, was poised to strike at the Pas-de-Calais. And to command this ghost army, they assigned the one general the Germans respected and feared most, the aggressive, flamboyant, and brilliant tank commander George S. Patton. This phantom army was given life through a symphony of deception. In the fields and harbors of southeastern England, facing Calais, a Hollywood-style army was constructed. Inflatable rubber tanks, painstakingly detailed, lined the roads. Plywood artillery pieces pointed towards France. A fleet of dummy landing craft bobbed in the estuaries. To the German reconnaissance planes flying high overhead, it looked like the largest military buildup in history. This visual trickery was supported by an even more sophisticated illusion, a torrent of fake radio traffic. Thousands of scripted messages simulating the day-to-day communications of a million-man army, from orders for ammunition to complaints about the food, were broadcast, creating an intricate, audible ghost that was utterly convincing to German signals intelligence. The ultimate proof of this deception's success lies buried in the German intelligence reports from the morning of June 6th. Even as thousands of Allied troops were fighting and dying on the beaches of Normandy, German reconnaissance continued to identify the Pas de Calais as the primary invasion zone. The Ghost Army felt more real, more threatening to the German High Command than the actual invasion taking place 200 miles to the south. This belief was meticulously nurtured by a network of double agents, the crown jewel of which was a Spanish chicken farmer turned master spy named Juan Pujol Garcia, known to the Allies as Garbo and to the Germans as Alaric. From a small house in London, Garbo fed his German handlers a steady stream of convincing but entirely false intelligence about FUSAG's preparations. He was so trusted that he invented a network of 27 completely imaginary subagents to bolster his credibility, and the Germans believed every word. As the sun began to rise over the Normandy coast, the sheer terrifying scale of the Allied armada became clear to the German soldiers on the front lines. Over 5,000 ships filled the horizon. But back at Hitler's headquarters and at the command center of OB West under Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, a fatal assumption was still being made. The reports of a massive naval fleet were initially dismissed as an Allied trick, perhaps a naval demonstration to sell the diversionary landings. The German Weather Service had predicted storms in the Channel, making a full-scale invasion impossible. This meteorological certainty reinforced the illusion. The Allies couldn't possibly be attacking for real in this weather. It had to be a bluff. General Erich Marx, the brilliant commander of the German 84th Corps in Normandy, was one of the first to sense the horrifying truth. An astute and experienced officer, he understood that the sheer weight of men and steel being thrown at his sector was far beyond the scope of any mere diversion. As reports of landings on 5 separate beaches poured in, he frantically tried to get the 21st Panzer Division, the only armored division positioned near the landing zones, to launch an immediate, decisive counterattack. He believed if he could hit them hard on the beaches before they established a foothold, he could still drive them back into the sea. But his pleas for reinforcements and decisive action were met with a frustrating and ultimately fatal paralysis. The German command structure in the West was a convoluted, bureaucratic mess of overlapping authority, a direct result of Hitler's deep-seated mistrust of his own generals. Rommel, the man on the ground, was absent. Von Rundstedt, the supreme commander in the West, had nominal control, but he did not have the authority to move the most powerful units. The armored fist that could have crushed the invasion, the elite panzer divisions of Panzer Group West, were designated as OKW reserves. They could not be moved, not one tank, not one soldier, without the direct, personal permission of Adolf Hitler. Then, a single piece of intelligence arrived that should have shattered the illusion completely. Allied paratroopers had seized key bridges over the Orne River deep inland. They had landed in force, with gliders delivering heavy equipment. This was not the action of a small-scale raiding party. Securing bridges deep behind enemy lines was a clear, unambiguous indication of a major, strategic invasion designed to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches and to facilitate a rapid breakout from the coast. Yet, in the minds of the German High Command, this crucial piece of the puzzle was twisted to fit their preconceived narrative. Perhaps, they reasoned, it was simply a larger-than-expected diversion. Their eyes and their minds remained fixated on the Pas-de-Calais. Von Rundstedt, a veteran of the old Prussian school of warfare, was a cautious, methodical commander. He was convinced that the Normandy landings were a large-scale raid, but their sheer size worried him. He telephoned Hitler's headquarters at the Berghof in the Bavarian Alps, requesting the release of the reserve panzer divisions to counter the Normandy landings, just in case. The request was received by General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff of the OKW. Jodl was hesitant. He didn't want to commit the strategic reserve to what was likely a feint, and more importantly, he did not dare wake the Führer. The real moment of truth, however, would come during a now infamous series of events, or rather non-events, at Hitler's mountain retreat. Hitler had been entertaining guests late the previous night and had taken a sleeping pill. His terrified aides, adhering to a strict policy of never waking him, did not inform him of the largest amphibious invasion in human history until he awoke naturally around noon. When he was finally briefed, his reaction was not of alarm, but of pure glee. "The news couldn't be better," he reportedly exclaimed. He believed the Allies had finally come out into the open and had fallen foolishly into his trap. He was certain their forces in Normandy would be easily annihilated, and he was still utterly convinced that the main attack, Patton's real attack, was yet to come at the Pas-de-Calais. While Hitler remained cocooned in his delusional confidence, the reality on the Normandy beaches was a brutal, bloody testament to the Allies' true intentions. The veteran 352nd Infantry Division, a unit which Allied intelligence had failed to detect, was inflicting devastating, horrific casualties on the American forces at the beach codenamed Omaha. The situation was desperate. The calls for reinforcements from the frontline commanders to their headquarters became more and more frantic, their messages filled with a rising tide of panic. "We are being bled white. The enemy is on the beach. They are breaking through. We need panzers. We need everything you can send now." It was in a series of tense phone calls and acrimonious meetings that afternoon that the house of cards built on whispers finally began to collapse. At his 1500 military conference, Hitler, finally grasping some of the scale of the Normandy battle, at last relented and released the Panzer reserves, but with a catastrophic caveat. He released the divisions to counterattack in Normandy, but he adamantly ordered that the bulk of the 15th Army was to remain in place at the Pas-de-Calais. The deception was still working. He was committing some of his strength, but holding back his most powerful fist for a phantom blow. For the men on the Normandy front, the decision was too little and far, far too late. The crucial morning hours, when the Allies were at their most vulnerable, had been squandered. The true, gut-wrenching moment of realization likely wasn't a single dramatic declaration in a smoke-filled room. It was a creeping, sickening certainty that spread through the German High Command like a contagion. It was in the voice of General Marx, who, shortly before being killed in action by an Allied fighter-bomber, told his subordinates that if they could not throw the invaders back into the sea within 48 hours, the war would be lost. It was in the frantic, contradictory orders being issued as commanders struggled to reconcile the undeniable reality of the reports from Normandy with their deeply ingrained, ferociously protected belief in the Pas-de-Calais invasion. It was the slow, horrifying dawning that their entire perception of the battlefield was a carefully constructed lie. And the deception held, with a tenacity that is almost unbelievable. For 7 crucial weeks after D-Day, Hitler and the German High Command continued to believe that Normandy was a secondary attack. They kept the powerful 15th Army, with its 200,000 men in the Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. This was the ultimate triumph of Operation Fortitude. To reinforce the illusion, on June 9th, 3 days after the landings, the double agent Garbo sent a message to his German handlers detailing the FUSAG order of battle and expressing his profound regret that his prior warnings about the Normandy diversion had not been acted upon more decisively. This message, a masterpiece of psychological warfare, cemented his credibility and convinced the Germans that the main attack was not only still to come, but was imminent. They awarded him the Iron Cross for his services. This single massive intelligence failure had catastrophic consequences from which the German war effort would never recover. The fatal delay in sending Panzer reinforcements to Normandy on June 6th allowed the Allies to consolidate and secure their fragile beachhead. By the time the German High Command finally accepted the reality of the situation and began to move the 15th Army south, it was too late. The Allies were pouring hundreds of thousands of men and millions of tons of material into France. The failure to counter the Normandy landings effectively on D-Day directly led to the Allied breakout, the encirclement and destruction of the German 7th Army in the Falaise pocket, and the eventual liberation of France in less than 3 months. In the final analysis, the battle for Normandy was won not just with bullets and bombs, but with a masterful, unprecedented manipulation of the human mind. The Allies had created a phantom army so convincing, so detailed, so psychologically potent that it paralyzed the entire German command structure at the most critical moment of the war. An army of rubber and radio waves held 19 real divisions in its thrall. On D-Day, the most important battle was not fought on the bloody sands of Omaha Beach or in the hedgerows of the Norman countryside. It was fought in the minds of the German generals, a battle they had already comprehensively lost before the first shot was even fired. They were not defeated by a lack of courage or a deficit of military skill. They were defeated by a house of cards built on whispers, enveloped in a fog of deception so thick and so complete that they could no longer distinguish the truth from the illusion. And in that moment of dawning horror, as the full, catastrophic truth of their monumental blunder became clear, they must have understood that the war, for them and for their nation, was already over.